My sister didn't forget to introduce me at her engagement party. She remembered. That was the problem. She waited until the room was full, until my father's business partner was standing close enough to hear, until the champagne had made everyone loose and easy. Then she turned to me with a smile I'd seen 100 times, warm on the surface, with something calculating underneath, and said, "This is my little sister. She fixes computers." She laughed like she was sharing something charming. We call her the tech support of the family. The people around her laughed too, the easy laugh of people who don't need to think about why something is funny. My name is Pell. I'm 31, and I'm not tech support. I'm a forensic data analyst. I reconstruct what happened to systems after something goes wrong. Breaches, fraud, sabotage, the digital version of a crime scene. Companies call me when they need to understand not just that something failed, but exactly how and exactly who. I work alone, mostly. I don't have business cards that impress people at parties. I don't explain my job at family dinners anymore because I spent years watching eyes glaze over before I finished the first sentence. My sister Thea has always known exactly how to use that. She's 35, 2 years older, 2 years more practiced at reading a room. She works in nonprofit development, grant writing, donor dinners, the art of making people feel good about giving money away. She's excellent at it. She is, genuinely, very good at her job. I want to be clear about that because this story isn't about jealousy. I have never wanted what Thea has. I've wanted to be seen clearly. That's different. Our family has a vocabulary for the two of us that set in like concrete sometime in middle school. Thea is the one who connects. I'm the one who disappears. Thea is ambitious in ways people understand. I'm ambitious in ways that make my mother nervous. Growing up, she got the praise that arrived already assembled. I got the version that came with an asterisk. Smart, but. Talented, but. The but was always there, waiting. That night, the engagement party was at my parents' house outside of Richmond, a large brick colonial with a back patio strung with lights and a catered spread that my mother had been planning for 6 weeks. Thea was marrying a man named Dev 8, whose family ran a commercial real estate firm out of Charlotte. Old money with new manners. The kind of family that asked about your occupation with genuine interest and then immediately calibrated everything else they said to the answer you gave. Dev's father, Whitmore, was there. He was the kind of man who took up a room not with volume but with stillness. Silver-haired, deliberate, the sort of person who had seen enough deals go badly that he no longer trusted anything that moved too quickly. He'd been talking to my father near the fireplace when Thea made her introduction. I watched him glance at me the way people glance at a piece of furniture that's been moved to the wrong corner of the room. I smiled back at him because I had nothing else to do with my face. My mother materialized at my elbow 20 minutes later with the same expression she always wore when she thought I was about to be a problem without realizing it. "Honey," she said, "are you doing okay over here?" She glanced at my half-empty glass. "You're not circulating." "I'm not a cocktail," I said. She smiled with just her mouth. "This is important to your sister." "I know, Mom." She lowered her voice. "Dev's family is very traditional. They value," she paused, searching, accomplishment. Visible accomplishment. Visible accomplishment. I looked at her. "So do I." She touched my arm briefly, the way you touch something fragile you're not sure about. "Just don't make it complicated tonight." That phrase, "don't make it complicated." I had been hearing it since I was 14 and asked too many questions at Thanksgiving. Since I got a scholarship to a school my parents had never heard of, and my mother spent 2 weeks asking if I was sure. Since I turned down a corporate job after graduate school to consult independently, and my father told me, quietly, that it might be better not to mention that at certain dinners. I found a chair near the edge of the patio and sat with my drink and watched my family perform the version of us that was appropriate for company. Sia caught my eye once from across the room and gave me a look that I could decode fluently after 31 years. It said, "Behave yourself, this is my night." I gave her nothing back, not a nod, not a smile, just held her gaze until she turned away. She was back an hour later. She didn't sit down. She never sits when she wants leverage. Standing is a choice. "I need to borrow you for a second," she said, and her hand closed around my wrist before I agreed. She walked me toward the fireplace where Dev's father was now standing with two other men I didn't recognize. Dev was there too, loosely holding a drink, watching Thea the way people watch things that are beautiful and slightly unpredictable. "Whitmore," Thea said warmly, "there's someone I wanted you to properly meet." He turned with the courteous attention of a man who had attended many parties and learned to look interested as a matter of discipline. "My little sister," Thea said. "She does IT work, consulting, sort of. She's been all over the place with it." She said it like an apology for a stain on the tablecloth. She said it like it explained something unflattering about me. "IT consulting," Whitmore said, and the words were polite and empty, already moving on. Thea's smile widened. "She's always been the quiet one. We never quite knew what she was going to do with herself, but she figured it out eventually." She laughed softly. "Better late than never, right?" Dev looked faintly uncomfortable. One of the other men smiled at nothing specific. Whitmore looked at me. Not the quick social inventory, the other kind, the slower kind, when something has snagged attention and the mind doesn't know yet why. His expression shifted. Not slowly, the way realization usually creeps in during polite conversation. It happened in one sharp movement, like a key turning. He said, "What's your last name?" Thea blinked. "Oh, she's Pell Visar." He wasn't asking her. His eyes stayed on me. Something in them had stopped moving. "What's your full name?" "Pell Visar," I said. He was quiet for a moment that was long enough to make the two other men look at each other. Then he said, quietly and with a precision that had nothing social left in it, "You wrote the Karnak methodology report." The room didn't stop. The music kept playing. The catering staff kept moving between guests with their trays of small things. But the air inside that small circle around the fireplace changed temperature in a way I felt in my sternum. Thea's laugh came out wrong. I watched her reach for it and miss the note. "The Karnak. What?" Whitmore wasn't looking at her. 3 years ago, he said to me, "We had a breach. Data compromise involving a subsidiary acquisition." He paused. "Our security consultants produced 18 months of work that told us almost nothing. You produced a report under a pseudonymous firm name in 6 weeks that identified the exact vector, the exact party, and the methodology used to obscure it." He stopped. "We never found out who was behind the filing firm. It was listed as a subcontractor on a contract we couldn't fully trace." "I can explain that," I said carefully. He waited. "The firm was a shell structure I used when I was doing private work on sensitive cases. I've since dissolved it. The partner who hired me for the Karnak work had privacy requirements and I maintained them." Whitmore was very still. "How did you build the trace pattern for the lateral movement across the subsidiary accounts?" I told him. In technical terms, briefly, the way you answer a real question from someone who can verify the answer. His expression did something I hadn't seen on a stranger's face in a long time. It became simply respectful. Thea said, laughing, with an edge under it now, "This is a little over my head, I'm afraid." Whitmore finally looked at her. He was polite. He was complete in his politeness. And then he turned back to me as if she were a door that had already closed. "She figured it out eventually," he said, repeating her words back to no one in particular. His tone was not unkind, but it landed the way accurate things land when they're placed correctly. Thea went quiet after dinner. After the toasts and the cake and the ritual family photographs, Whitmore's assistant found me near the garden gate with a card and a request to follow up at my convenience. I held the card for a moment before pocketing it. The paper was heavy, the kind of weight that means something. The conversation that came next didn't happen that night. It happened 4 days later in a glass-walled office in Charlotte that looked out over a skyline I'd only seen from interstate signs. Whitmore sat across from me in a chair that cost more than my first car and spoke without preamble because he'd decided I preferred that. He was right. 3 months before Thea's engagement, he said, his company had completed a major acquisition. And in the months since, the numbers from one division were producing patterns that his financial team couldn't explain. Not wrong enough to flag as fraud, he said, but wrong in the way that suggests someone who understands how audits work has been careful. He slid a folder across the desk. The data inside was dense, structured, and immediately interesting. I could feel my brain start to move differently, the way it does when a real problem is in front of it. Roots that didn't follow operational logic, Invoices with vendor names that resolve to thin corporate histories. Approval chains with one name recurring at the junctions. I'd seen this architecture before. Not the specific companies, not the specific figures, but the structure. The way the irregularities clustered. The way the timing aligned with moments of organizational distraction. A merger, a leadership transition, a major contract. Someone patient and technically fluent had built something designed to look like noise. I'll look at it, I told Whitmore. Back home, in my apartment with its 2 monitors and the view of a parking structure I'd stopped seeing years ago, I opened the files and started building the map. By the 2nd day, I had the shape of it. By the 4th day, I had a name. The name was attached to the division head who had been brought over in the acquisition. His approvals sat at the junctions I'd identified. His vendor relationships appeared in contracts that served no operational function I could find. The money didn't disappear. It redirected, slowly, through intermediaries into structures that would take years to unwind if no one was specifically looking. He'd been counting on no one specifically looking. He'd been counting on no one specifically looking. I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about Whitmore's assistant handing me a card at my sister's engagement party. I thought about Thea's hand on my wrist, steering me toward the fireplace. I thought about she figured it out eventually. I thought about how that was the closest my family had come to describing me accurately in 20 years, and how they'd said it as an insult. I was still thinking about that when my phone rang. It was Thea. I answered. Her voice was careful in the way I recognized from childhood. Measured, sweet on top, with the specific undertone of someone calculating their approach. She asked how I was. She asked how Charlotte had gone. She'd heard from Dev that I'd met with Whitmore professionally, and wasn't that interesting? Wasn't that a funny coincidence? I waited. She said, Dev mentioned his father seems interested in working with you. He might be, I said. That's great, she said. Her voice tightened in a way she probably didn't hear. Really, that would be good for you. She paused. Dev's family is important to us. You know that. His father's opinion matters a lot right now. I understand that, I said. So whatever you're working on, she said carefully, if there's anything sensitive, anything that could create complications. What do you mean by complications? I asked. She exhaled. Pell. Don't be obtuse. I'm not. I'm asking you to say what you mean. A beat of silence. Then his family doesn't need any kind of drama right now. The wedding is in 4 months. Whatever consulting work you're doing, just be careful about how you handle it. I looked at my monitor. The map of accounts and approvals and redirected money, all of it neat and documented and true. Are you asking me to handle it quietly? I said. I'm asking you to be a team player, she said, which is how she'd been asking me to be smaller my entire life. The irony of it landed somewhere that felt less like anger and more like fatigue. She had no idea what I was looking at. She didn't know the name in the file. She was just running her usual calculation. Pell is doing something that could attract attention, and attention is a resource Thea manages. This has nothing to do with you, I told her. Everything in this family has something to do with me, she said, and she believed that, which was maybe the saddest part. I hung up and went back to my map. My mother called the next morning. Her voice was warm and worried, which is her most effective combination. She'd heard I was doing some work for Dev's father. Was everything okay? Was I being careful? I'm working, I said, that's all. She said, your sister is just... She wants things to go smoothly. Her smoothly, or the truth? I asked. Pell, these are different things, Mom. This time they're different things. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, what are you saying? I'm saying that I'll do my job correctly. What does that mean? It means what it means, I said. I could hear her trying to find the angle that would work. She went through several. The wedding. Think about your sister. You don't have to make everything so difficult. Each one hit the same place that had been absorbing those phrases for 20 years without them ever actually landing. I love you, I told her, and I'm going to do my job correctly. She hung up without saying goodbye, which told me she understood. The presentation happened on a Tuesday, in the same glass-walled room in Charlotte. Whitmore sat at the head of the table with his general counsel and 2 board members. The division head, a man named Fian, was present and did not know what the meeting was about. I had learned working these cases that the moment the map appears on a screen, it becomes a different kind of thing. People look at data and tables and their minds find exceptions. They look at a map. Lines, nodes, money following the distortions like a shadow drawn to a shape, and their pattern recognition activates before their defenses do. I walked them through it methodically. The vendor structures, the approval chains, the timing correlation, the redirected invoices, the intermediaries, the money that moved in amounts designed to stay below the thresholds that trigger automatic review. Fian started with objections that sounded operational. I answered each one with the specific data point that precluded it. He moved to procedural objections. I walked through the documentation trail. At a certain point, he stopped objecting and went very still. Whitmore said, "Did you approve these vendor contracts?" Fian said, "There's context you're missing." Whitmore said, "Did you approve them?" A pause. "Yes," Fian said. "Did you disclose your financial relationship with the intermediary entities?" The silence this time was the kind that answers. Whitmore's hand moved slightly and Fian stopped talking. I pulled up the final chart. It was simple, a comparison of outflows before and after Fian's arrival mapped against divisional performance. The story it told was not complicated. You built a system inside the system, I said quietly, designed to generate costs that look like friction but pay out to entities you control. The room held the information. I watched faces move through stages. Whitmore's face moved through nothing visible. It had already moved, privately, before the meeting began. "Legal will contact you today," Whitmore said to Fian. "Do not access any company systems after you leave this room." Fian looked at me for a long moment. His expression wasn't rage. It was something more specific, the look of someone recalculating, arriving at a number they don't like. Then he stood and left, and the door shut behind him. Whitmore looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Thank you," he said. I nodded. He was quiet for a beat, then, "Your sister introduced you as someone who fixes computers." "I know," he almost smiled. He didn't quite. But the shape of one passed over his face. My parents called that evening, my father this time, which meant the call had been planned. He had his authoritative voice on, the steady, measured tone he uses when he's decided to be the adult in a situation. He said, "We heard there were some issues at Whitmore's company. Word travels fast," I said. He said, "Thea is upset. Is she?" "Pell," his voice tightened. "She's getting married in 4 months. Whatever happened today," I told the truth, I said. "That's what happened today." He exhaled. "You could have handled this differently." "Brought it to Whitmore privately. Let him decide." "I brought it to Whitmore," I said. "He decided to have a meeting. I work for him." "You work for Thea's future family," he said, and I could hear how clearly he believed that changed something. "I work for Whitmore," I repeated, "and I'll work for anyone who hires me correctly." "That's not going to change because the wedding is in 4 months. He said, "If this affects Dev's family's opinion of Thea, then they'll have an accurate picture," I said. His silence was the angry kind, the compressed kind, the kind I'd been watching him use on problems he couldn't argue out of for my entire life. "When have you ever protected this family?" he said finally. I thought about that for a second. "Genuinely, when have you ever needed me to?" I asked. "You've always had Thea for that." He didn't answer. He never does, when the answer would require him to agree with me. "Thea didn't call again. She texted once. 3 days later, 'I hope you're happy.'" I stared at it for a while. I thought about what would make her feel better and what would make it true and whether those were the same thing, and concluded they weren't. I typed back, "I hope the wedding is everything you want it to be." Then I put my phone face down and went back to my monitors. Whitmore offered me a contract 3 weeks later. Retainer-based, independent, with terms that respected the way I work, which is to say alone and without interference, and on a timeline that serves the accuracy of the output rather than anyone's comfort with what the output might be. It was, by any measure, the best offer I'd received in my career. I took it. Not because of the money, though the money was significant, because the problem was real and the client understood what he was hiring. Because for the first time in a professional context, someone had looked at what I produced and calibrated his estimation of me to match it, rather than to what was easier to explain at a party. Fian's situation resolved the way these things resolve, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the grinding procedural weight of an institution correcting itself. Audits, attorneys, federal notifications, the kind of consequences that don't arrive with handcuffs in a conference room but with paperwork that follows a person for the rest of their professional life. I didn't attend Thea's wedding. I told my mother I was in the middle of a time-sensitive project, which was true. She didn't argue. I don't know if she was relieved or hurt, and I found, somewhat to my surprise, that I'd stopped trying to calculate it. That math had never worked in my favor anyway. What I did instead was drive out to the edge of the city where the freight terminals run along the river, where I could park and sit and watch the containers move on their tracks in the dark. I've always liked watching systems that work. The logic of it. The way every piece has a function that holds even when no one is watching, even when no one knows its name. I thought about being introduced as tech support at a party. I thought about a folder of data that didn't lie. I thought about Whitmore saying she figured it out eventually in a voice that made the words mean something different than my sister had intended. I thought about the way she'd steered me toward the fireplace with her hand on my wrist. Sure, she was positioning me for her benefit. Sure, she understood the room better than I did. She wasn't wrong that she understood the room. Thea is very good at rooms. She just forgot that I don't work in rooms. I work in what's underneath them. The architecture people assume no one will read, the record of what actually happened, as opposed to the version that was presented at the party. People will tell you who you are for years. They'll say it pleasantly, in front of guests, like it's a known fact about the weather. They'll believe it themselves, which is what makes it stick. They'll hand you a label with such confidence that you spend a decade testing whether they're right. The only answer I've ever found is to become something so specific, so exactly itself, that the label just slides off. You don't argue it. You don't perform against it. You just do the work until the work speaks in a language that's louder than the people who were sure they had you figured out. It isn't fast. It isn't satisfying the way revenge is satisfying in movies. But it's real, and it lasts. That counts for something. When the lights on the river are small and the containers keep moving and your name is on a contract that nobody handed you, that counts for quite a lot. I've thought a lot about what Thea's hand on my wrist actually meant that night. She wasn't being cruel in the way people are cruel when they know what they're doing. She genuinely believed she was managing a situation, that I was a variable she could position for her own benefit the way you'd move a chair. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the malice. The certainty. She was certain she understood the room, and she was right about the room. She understood the guests, the social geometry, who to stand near and who to angle away from. What she didn't understand, what she'd never bothered to understand, was me. And that gap between her certainty and the actual facts is what caused everything that followed, not my choices, not some abstract force of justice in the universe. Just the simple, structural consequence of operating on false information for too long. Farron did the same thing, really. He built something he believed was invisible because he understood how audits are structured. He understood the surface. He didn't understand that someone could be looking beneath it, patient and precise, without announcing herself, without being the kind of person people notice at a party. I think about what Whitmore said afterward, repeating Thea's words back to the room. She figured it out eventually in that flat, accurate tone. He wasn't defending me exactly, he was just correcting the record. That's what he does. He's built a career on the gap between what people present and what's actually there, and he recognized me because I operate in the same gap. I just do it with data instead of deals. What I've learned, and what took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when it's easy. It's about doing the right thing when the people who were supposed to love you are on the other side of it. My mother called it selfish. My father called it complicated. Thea called it drama. What it actually was honest. And honesty, when it's specific and documented and inconvenient, is a kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in the work. The intelligence piece is this: I could have softened the report. I could have framed Farron's misconduct as operational ambiguity and let Whitmore draw his own, slower conclusions. I had that option. What I understood, and what I think takes genuine clarity to understand, is that softening the truth to protect the people around you is not kindness. It's a loan with interest. Someone always pays eventually. The only question is who. And the perseverance part, that's the quietest of the three, and maybe the hardest. It's not dramatic. It didn't look like anything from the outside. It just looked like a woman sitting at her monitors for 4 days, building a map no one asked her to build beautifully, because building it correctly was the only version she knew how to live with. That's what perseverance actually is, most of the time. Not endurance under pressure. Just refusing to do the lesser version of the work when no one would know the difference. Thea's wedding happened without me. Farron's situation is still resolving the way these things do, slowly in rooms I'll never see. My parents have found a new equilibrium that doesn't require me to fit into it, and I found I sleep better inside that particular silence. The freight terminals are still there at the edge of the city, lit up at night, containers moving on schedule. I still drive out there sometimes. There's something about watching a system that works that doesn't care about your name or your seat at the table, only about whether the thing you built actually holds, that feels like the truest version of home I've ever found.